Welcome to the Lead Machine Growth Show, where we talk about business growth, systems, and what actually works in the real world. Today's conversation is about a problem I see all the time, and it's not anything new. A company grows, the team works harder, new software or new technology gets added, maybe AI enters the conversation, yet somehow the work becomes slower, more frustrating, and more complicated. David Waters helps organizations uncover friction hiding underneath the work. And today we're going to talk about what happens when growth exposes the problem nobody knew was there. So, David, my brother, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation. So I geek out about this sort of stuff. So yeah, happy to chat about
So,
it.
so do I. We'll try not to get too geeky for the audience, but yeah, we know that we love to use technology to enable businesses to grow. A lot of times that growth is unbridled and unfocused, and technology is a tool. It's meant to enable people to do things better, faster, more consistently, repeatably. But it doesn't always work out that way. And that's why David and I are both in business. You've worked with
Absolutely.
organizations, David, that thought they needed better technology when the real issue was somewhere else. At what point does growth start creating complexity that leaders don't immediately recognize?
Yeah, it's unfortunately something we see all the time. Organizations and its folks, very passionate, hardworking, smart people, working harder and harder as an organization grows. And to oversimplify the challenge, you've got people running processes that were designed for when organizations were much smaller, where you could get away with doing things a little bit more manually. The repetition didn't have such a bigger impact, but you've just increased the amount of work, you've increased the amount of people, but you haven't changed the underlying processes beneath it. So what in organizations is there'll be processes, things that get done just because someone knows how to do it. You might hear people say, do you know what? Sarah knows how to do that. You better ask her about that. Or, oh, I
Mhm.
don't put that information in the system. I've got my own spreadsheet. It's those sorts of situations that you hear about that may seem small on the surface, but that all kind of builds up and really impacts an organization's ability to grow at scale, to be able to do more. And unfortunately, the default answer that people go for first is, okay, we need a new system, rather than taking the time to have a look at understanding actually where are the real bottlenecks? Where does the work feel harder than it needs to? Why is it harder than it needs to be? Because putting technology on top of a process that you don't really understand and other systems and stuff like that, it actually just makes things worse. It makes it messier, sometimes slows it down. It's a tale as old as time of organizations introducing new technology, which people don't end up using and actually makes their life more complicated. They've spent all this money on it and it's the new shiny thing that's out there. It's unfortunately, as I say, a tale as old as time. It's something that folks really need to do. Unfortunately, the more boring stuff first of really looking at how you work. How do your people work? How do they spend their time? Where does where does work take longer than it should do? Why does it feel harder than it should do? And where are your people taking on more of the effort? Whereas your systems and processes should be doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but they're actually not.
Yeah, we talk a lot about processes being in the field that we're in. In businesses, they don't like to hear that, especially the people that are on the front lines because they're already they have a process already.
Mhm.
It might not be documented, but it's what they've worked out so they could get their job done within the 8 hours that they're going to be working. Why do you think it's people are so resistant to sitting down and examining those processes and saying, okay, right now, if I had just one more customer or two more or 10 more, I'd have to quit. I just
Yep.
can't handle it. And people do quit over that kind of thing. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think there's three things that kind of come together, not necessarily all at the same time, but there's three levels to it. So a lot of folks that work in founder-led organizations that have grown, there is very much a sense from that leadership, and it's not necessarily bad intent. I understand the logic behind it. It's a mentality of we've grown from nothing, maybe it was just them, to 40, 50 people. We're successful. Why would you change something that has got us this success? So
Hmm.
there's very much a resistance of, we've been successful, we don't want to change it. But unfortunately, what has got organizations here, which is a lot of effort, a lot of heavy lifting, isn't gonna support them to getting to that next step, because you can't just keep throwing people at the problem. Eventually, you've got to you've got to balance the books, right? And certainly funding is and budgets are very tight at the moment. I think the second thing you've got is, you know, everyone can point to a handful of folks in their organization that are absolute hero employees. They are your A
Hmm.
star players, right? And
Yeah.
they're great. They are smart, passionate, really hardworking. One of the things that makes them so good at their job is they keep on absorbing more. They keep on taking more, and it's more workarounds, and it's more little, oh, I'll just do this manually, or it doesn't take very long. It's 10 minutes. I just export this out. And that, again, that can work, but they often, you see a performance review system that rewards that type of behavior. So they'll be hearing from their leadership, you're amazing. We couldn't do any of this without you. It's that kind of thing. So there's not much of a personal incentive for that to change. And I think the third thing that comes across as well, which is very difficult for people to change their mindset towards, is an assumption that, okay, I have to spend 4 days a month doing this piece of work. I absolutely despise it. I loathe the moment it comes up for the start of the month because I have to do this set of reporting or whatever it looks like. But when you speak to people, like, okay, cool, let's take that piece out from you and let's automate that. The assumption is, if I'm not doing that, then maybe I'm not needed in this job anymore. So there's a real resistance to this idea of automation because people are fearful that it's going to take their job. And the reality is, particularly for growing organizations, but organizations of any size, is it's not about, okay, we're going to automate parts of this, which means we don't need you anymore. It's, we're going to automate parts of this because this isn't a great use of your time. This is,
Yeah.
you're a very smart, passionate, hardworking subject matter expert. We need to use your skills better on stuff that, A, hopefully you enjoy and you get more out of, but B, drives a lot more value for the organization than pushing buttons. So I think
Right.
it's a combination of those three things that build that initial resistance to wanting to do the hard work. And it's frustrating. AI can make this a bit easier now, which is great, but of actually looking at where you're working and looking at how you can improve the processes and the setups that you have.
Yeah. So you mentioned AI. So when the CEO says AI, or when the leader says, let's automate this, let's throw technology at this, what do they believe that AI is going to solve?
So I think it's like with technology through the ages, it's that silver bullet thing, right? If we
Hmm.
just throw AI at this, everything will be fine. And there isn't a mistake in wanting to use AI at all. It's the mistake, as I mentioned before, is starting with the technology instead of looking at the work. It was actually a prospect in the end. We ended up not working with them after we scoped some stuff out. But they came to us and they're like, oh, we just been at a conference. We saw this guy talking about agentic AI. We're all in. What do we need to do? I'm like, hang on a sec. Let's just take a step back. They're very excited. There was very much a sense of not wanting to be left behind. I think there's certainly around a lot of leaders that I speak to, there's a bit of guilt with AI of like, we know we should be doing something, or maybe we've turned on Copilot in our Microsoft subscription. Is that doing AI? Can we say that we're doing something? And so
Hmm.
there's that kind of guilt and that worry that kind of pushes them to take action. When we actually sat down with these folks and we looked at, okay, talk us through where your staff are feeling the most pain, there was a piece of work that they were doing repetitively every week around their website content and social media. And they're like, we can just get agentic AI to do this, right? I'm like, you could, but that gets probably quite unnecessarily expensive and not it's not the most efficient way to do that. You actually just need quite basic automation, stuff that they could largely do themselves. Was one of the reasons why we didn't end up working with them. It was, we pointed them to some tools that they could spin this stuff up themselves. So the concern that I see around the push towards AI is, in some cases, AI can actually overcomplicate the problem and make it much more expensive, harder to get to a solution. You see this with things like vibe coding and that kind of stuff, where people are, I can just do it myself. Absolutely, but there's a cost to that. And I think This is where, going back to those kind of hero employees, quite often we hear a lot of stories around folks just becoming more and more exhausted and burnout becoming a real problem. And that's because in those situations, you've got folks who don't think they can take leave because they're the only ones, they feel they're the only ones that they can do this sort of stuff, don't feel like they can, or worried when they do take time off and are very anxious about it. And that just leads to exhaustion. That's why it's really important to not rush to AI, not rush to technology, understand the work, because if you can take away those parts of people's jobs that they really don't like, that really drives that anxiety or exhaustion or concern, you can really turn that around. And we've done that with a number of organizations where you've relieved the pressure on one person, and the difference it makes is huge.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, you and I had a call maybe a week or so ago, and we were talking about a particular client of yours that was
Mm.
having, they were having a reporting problem. Can we dig into that a little bit? I think it was taking 3.5 days to do this report. And what kind of friction was that causing in the organization? And was it preventing growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very common tale that we've seen. So we were doing some work with Thriving Communities Partnership. They're a nonprofit in Australia. They do some amazing work with working with corporate partners to help them support their customers who are experiencing vulnerability, so financial hardship or whatever that looks like. So they set up this program, very much startup mentality that they had. Set up this program working with corporate partners. And as the program started with a handful of partners, and every month, this one guy who was supposed to be leading the project was doing these reports. And he'd have to do a project level report and then individual partner reports. Early on, it was time consuming, but it was manageable, right? He's there pulling extracts from different systems, cleaning the data. He's having to update all these different Google Maps to get images of where services were delivered and assembling all those outputs manually. And, the interesting thing is, you know, the he didn't the organization, and he didn't design it to be a lengthy process. But as the program grew, which was great, of course, you've got more and more partners, that work just piles up and up. And it was getting to the point, as you say, of 3.5 days. And that's a long time for someone his job isn't just reporting, his job is to lead the program. That's a long time out of that. And it also meant that he and the rest of the organization couldn't look across the data sets. They're too busy just looking at what has happened and reporting on yesterday's news. What did it look like last month? Just because they need to get these reports out, and not able to start looking at the data to say, okay, what does this tell us about where we need to be looking at how we deliver our services? What do we need to look at to where we can put in different processes in place, or where we need to support our partners a bit differently? You really lost a lot of that forward-looking activity and work because they're tied up with this. So when we came in, the CEO was frustrated because the project lead would complain about this every month, rightly so as well. It's 3.5, 4 days of spreadsheets and not very exciting work. He loathed when it came around each month. And they wanted to be able to do stuff a little bit differently. We looked at that whole process. We automated parts of it. We kept the human in the loop where it made sense to and where he wanted it to. And we've turned that into something that takes a few hours. So that few days back really helps relieve that pressure, relieves the sense of repetition, relieves for them as an organization that dependence on that one person who knew all the steps. Now it's largely you push a button and it spins out. And they've got that opportunity to use that time to start thinking more broadly. Also, there's not the concern that if they take on more partners, which of course they want to do, that they need to get someone else in to do some of the admin work as well. So it's really enabling that growth for them. And it's really interesting because when you look at this stuff from the outside, if you were observing that organization, you'd be like, the work's not failing. The reports are still getting done, all of this sort of stuff. Things are still getting ticked off. But it was being held together by far too much human effort. And that's just not scalable, and that's where things break.
Yeah. And so that's the success story. So what did it look like for the CEO? What was his credibility being questioned? How did it feel to him? What was he?
I think for them, she was getting complaints from the lead about the work. So she's got that pressure and employee pressure. I think in terms of being able to take the program onto the next level. They've grown to a decent number of partners now, but to continue growing that and expand out the services, it's got to be data informed, right? You've got to have those data to make decisions. And very much she felt like she didn't have that data to make those decisions confidently to start moving the program to where it could go to the next level. I think so much with, particularly in smaller organizations where decision making centers more around a smaller group of people, having the confidence around the data and the information that you're using to make decisions is so important, particularly because very stretched, working very hard. It's a very stressful role. So to have that confidence in what you're doing because you've got someone who's got the time to look at the data properly makes a really big difference to the quality of the decision making. And that's really taken their 2-3 months into that process now of having those reports pretty much completely automated. So they're now starting to use that time to look forward for planning the second half of the year going into the next financial year in Australia.
So, what was the thing that happened that made them finally reach out to get some help? Was it the manager who was complaining, or was it the CEO who couldn't make decisions, or were partners starting to complain?
So I think it was more to the project lead's credit. I think it was his constant concerns around the amount of time that he was asking. Because obviously, as a leader, she was asking for more things from him. And he was like, look, I don't have the time. I was already doing some work with them. We'd been working with them for a number of years. So it was actually through one of those conversations where it actually came up as a bit of a throwaway comment, really. So I was stuck doing these reporting. Well, we can have a look at that. Let me have a look. We can scope something out. And yeah, within a 4 to 6 week period, going through 2 reporting periods, they're in a much better place. And I think it's been a huge change for the project lead because he's now not spending that time. That pressure is relieved. Now, I wouldn't want to speculate on what would happen, but you see it very often where that pressure builds and builds and builds and builds, and eventually something has to break, right? So it's being able to catch that sort of stuff early, support the team, and then obviously just make better data-driven decisions off the back of that.
So, what kind of decisions is the CEO now able to make that she couldn't make before?
So they're able to look at forward-looking data now. So they weren't able to, everything was looking back. So it was always, okay, just how did we do last month? Are we ticking that off? Where she wanted the project lead to be able to say, okay, looking across, so they work all across Australia. Australia's a massive country, smaller population. How are we, what's our reach? What regions are we underserving? What do we need to look at? What can we forecast for next month based on the previous 18 months, 24 months worth of data that they've been running the program? So it's making decisions like that to understand, okay, how can we continue to improve the project? They're still in that process at the moment, so I don't have concrete actions that they've been able to make, but it was very much around relieving that initial pressure and enabling the project lead to start actually looking at the data in a more insightful way rather than just reporting the news about what happened last month. And that's the great thing about business these days. We have so much data. It's how it gets used is typically the problem.
Yeah. And so, what was the project lead now has a little bit more time? What is he enabled to be doing now? Also, what effect did that 3.5 days have on his staff? What were they complaining about before you had this transformation?
Yeah, so I think the big challenge is as the program grows, and you can apply this to any situation, new customers, that kind of stuff, right? As there's more interactions, there's more human contact, and that's what generally people are having to pay to be part of the program. So customers, in a sense, retention is really important. So they do need that personal touch. The project lead would meet with partners regularly. There's an onboarding process, there's that kind of stuff. And all of that builds up so that at the start of the month, he knows that he's got no time to be able to do that. Putting more time and effort, I think this is where technology can really add value, particularly in an age of AI, is actually support folks to spend more time having human interactions. Because we all know that's where business is really done, is the interactions between the individuals themselves rather than completely autonomous or semi-removed. So it's given him that opportunity to spend more time with folks. And that also helps from relationship building, identifying areas where the programs can be improved and that kind of stuff, as well as that ability to start looking at data in a very different way and start identifying where we can move forward. The next stage of the project that we're looking at is once he's done a couple of months of manual analysis of that data and what he wants to look at, you can start automating that analysis as well. We take that, again, remove the number crunching once you know what you want to look for, so he can spend more time acting on the insights of that analysis rather than doing the data analysis itself. That's the next evolution of where we take this is we've automated the looking back, work out what you want to look at looking forward, and then let's automate that piece so that you can spend more time on what does that mean? How do you implement it? What do you do with them?
Yeah. How long did he suffer through that problem?
Oh, and since the program started, so the program's been like 18, I think 18, 20 months. And again, as I said, it wasn't early on when they had a small number of partners, wasn't a massive deal. Annoying, but not a massive deal. And it's just grown and grown. A good 18 months of suffering through this
Yeah.
to get to that point. So it's, yeah.
Did other people have frustration with this also, other than the CEO? Were there other people involved that were stakeholders to this data that tired of the yesterday's
Yeah.
news?
Yeah, so I think partners were keen to get the data earlier. That's anecdotally through the program lead. That was one of the things that he was quite excited about was both the relief for him, but also getting the information out to the relevant partners quicker. It's the data's there. It shouldn't take 3.5, 4 days for those reports to get out. Now it's sent the same day at the start of the month. So certainly relieving that bit of pressure off the partners. It is quite an enclosed program within the organization, so it didn't impact many folks outside of the project team, the CEO and the partners. But what I found quite interesting is as that story has started to digest through the organization, it's sparking more conversations around if you can automate that, can we get rid of this bit that's really frustrating that I have to spend a day on or 2 days or whatever in different parts of the organization. But I hate the terminology, but I haven't quite landed on something. I prefer digital transformation or whatever that looks like. It's very difficult. And I think organizations try to do it in a big go. What I've seen real progress across a lot of organizations is more iterative adoption, that people start seeing the benefits and they're like, I want that. How can I get that? People are coming to their leadership asking for that rather than it being pushed down onto them. So,
Yeah, I call that the power of incremental action. So
exactly.
you take a pilot project, and then you prove that it works, and then you scale it out like you're doing, and then you replicate that
Yep.
same process. Whether it might not be the same systemic process, but it's the way that you implemented it, you would do the same thing. You would start a small pilot, and I call that rinse and repeat. So
Yeah, exactly.
that's how it goes across the organization. So were the partners, were they making decisions on the data about how they would maybe support the program further if they had the information in a more timely manner? Was there a risk of a partner being dissatisfied with the program because of the lack of the data?
Yeah, absolutely. They're paying into the program to be part of it. It's a very innovative program. Work requires a lot of cross collaboration between partners. It's managed through Thriving Communities Partnership, the nonprofit that I worked with. But of course, the power of the program is the organizations that are part of it. So not to go into too much detail, but the idea behind it is for folks who are experiencing financial hardship, only having to explain their story once. So you call up your
Mm,
telco, I'm experiencing financial hardship for whatever. There's a process in place facilitated by TCP, the organization, that shares that story, that financial hardship situation with their other providers. So they're not having to call, particularly if typically in cases of domestic violence and stuff like that, taking that burden off the consumer who's experiencing in a vulnerable position and experiencing that financial hardship is huge, but it requires organizations to be in that network, right? So if you start losing some of those key pillars from there, it really impacts the viability and usefulness of the program. So it's really important to keep the partners on board and show them the progress of what they're getting from being part of the program. So it's both information that they're collecting and sending to other organizations, as well as organizations sending information to them about their own customers. So being able to show that
yeah.
through the data obviously adds a lot of value and justifies the helps to justify the fees that are part of being part of the program.
Yeah, so it wasn't just the CEO's problem. It ended up being, actually, it affected the end user, because that
Could do, yeah.
enablement, the enablement of being able to share my story once. m- Most people, many people who are in those disadvantaged situations don't know how to navigate through all the resources that are available to
Spot
them.
on.
And so when a company like this takes and solves that problem, we have something like that in a friend of mine is involved in that in my town that has that
Mm,
to help them navigate through all the resources that are available because they're suffering in their own world and their own
correct.
story and they don't really know where to turn and they hear about this one place but you know how frustrating it is to explain your problem over and over again to all these different organizations and they feel like they're being just given the runaround.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So it's an amazing program, amazing work that they do. So to have a small part in making that a little bit more efficient is very rewarding for me personally and the folks that worked on it. But
yeah,
yeah, it's and again, no one sat down with that program and designed the reporting process to be where it got to. It evolved that way. And that's typically how these things, this isn't that there's no folks sitting down thinking, I'm going to design a really inefficient process that's going to, the moment we hit sort of 40, 50, 60, 100 partners, it's going to be a problem. It's just how this sort of stuff evolves. And that's the key for folks, leaders at the moment, particularly in growing organizations, is how can you identify that before something breaks? Because that's usually the visible point, right? Something breaks, someone leaves, or whatever that looks like. How can you identify this sort of stuff before this happens?
yeah. And I think I've been the hero employee, the hero, and you probably have been too. You probably are a hero. I'm a hero
Mhm.
because I can do many things just like you can. So that's one way leadership can identify. They Founders are usually the hero.
Correct. Yep.
And
Absolutely.
when a founder can take in their people to become the heroes, then you've really got something. Because then the heroes in the organization can do those kinds of transformational things that you're talking about without having to rely on the founder who knows everything about the business. Everyone needs to know everything about the business. Not everybody's
Yep.
going to be a hero, but that's where you can identify if you got, oh, Sally knows how to do that. You better go check with her. That's
Yep.
that's a telltale sign that I might have some growth friction here because
Yep.
growth always creates friction. It just you don't know how it's going to surface. It could surface in your leadership. You might have an employee who's out you've outgrown. You might have a process that you've outgrown. So,
Yeah. Correct.
what other examples that you have? This is a really good one, AI, because we're talking about data. But what other examples do you have, real quick, about how people have been growing and find? Because this is your wheelhouse. You've
Yeah. Yeah.
probably got
Absolutely.
many stories. Maybe there's a story in your own organization
Mm.
that you could tell us about.
Yeah, I'll start with a brief customer story just because they're always a bit more interesting than the work you do yourself in
Yeah.
your own organization. So we've actually just finished the first phase of the project with them now, actually. A global foundation. They provide grants across 30 countries or so across the globe, primarily directed towards young women, organizations supporting young women in different parts of the globe. They use a grant management system. It's good for the administration side of things, money in, money out, and tracking that. But obviously, they also capture a lot of information about how the grantees are going, how the projects are going, and that kind of stuff. That information was all not hidden, just a bit inaccessible within the system. So my main contact there, she was the head of impact. Any questions about the projects, the different programs, all came through her. Any reporting that needed to be done, all came through her. And that wasn't because she's the only one who had access to the system. It's just she was the only one that knew how all the bits kind of came together. And it was, oh, you need to run this report and I need to take this out because that doesn't quite apply. And it's all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. That sort of more sort of portfolio level insights all derived from there. And work was still getting done. They were still doing the reports. They were still doing the insights, the board reporting that they needed to do, the external funder reporting. But it was still someone holding that kind of picture together manually, all in their own. Even though the system had all the information, it's just dependent on that one person. So that was the kind of big ticket problem that we were asked to come in and solve for them. And the good thing was in this situation, and this is consistent across a lot of organizations, it's not that they didn't have the data. It's not that we just can't pull the information. It's the data's there, they just couldn't access it. So for us, it was about how can we take that information out of a system that was not necessarily the most intuitive designed for that particular activity and put it into something that made a lot more sense, that was a lot more accessible. So we built them out these dashboards that they could filter the information and that kind of stuff, democratize that information by giving access to more folks, and empower the grant managers in the different countries and those who are looking after the management of the grants with the individual grantees. And that's really freed up a lot of time, but it's also empowered the folks that were doing that. They now have access to information. They can download grant reports at the click of a button that they can sit down and work with their folks on. And then the other side of what we did as well, which is where I think it gets really interesting, is a really good use of AI, was part of the administration and the reporting that grantees were doing is they would, write in as part of their reporting how the project was going. This is what we've done. So really long kind of text responses on what was happening. We used AI to look across all of the different grants that they had in their system, all of the different responses they had, to start pulling out insights and code that
Yeah.
qualitative, that free text information, so that they could start looking at trends at a high level. And you'd never be able to do that. You're talking, I think we ended up, I think each grant has about 20 responses. There's over 200 grants over the last couple of years. That workload just isn't doable by hand. So we were able to pull all of that out, include that information in the dashboard as well, so folks can see, okay, what are the key trends, what are the key themes that are coming up across different areas within my own portfolio that they might not have been able to see because it's just hidden in all these different places. I think that's a really good example of where AI in particular can help draw out information, not jump to the decision-making piece, but really enable people to make better decisions based on the information that's coming through.
Now, this hero at this business, what
Mm.
was her life like? What did it look like for her operationally before you came to the rescue?
Yeah,
What was her life like?
yeah, very, very. I'm sure a lot of people will resonate this. Teams constantly pinging. Can you do this? What is this like? Reporting deadlines coming up. I need this. What really random questions that would interrupt today on stuff that folks now can largely answer themselves. There's still a bit of bedding in as people get used to understanding what the data means, but just that and anyone who works with a team knows what this is, that constant interruption of I feel like people have a bit of PTSD with the notification sound in Teams or Slack or whatever that looks like. It's just like,
Mhm.
oh, what do people want now? I'm in the middle of something. So really trying to shift away from that constant being interrupted, being under pressure, not being able to own and manage your day to a certain extent because of the interruptions and because of what people are asking, I think makes a big difference to her ability as someone who looks after impact and monitoring and evaluation within the organization, to start focusing more on that and what needs to happen for the organization going into the future, rather than just help people look into the past. A very similar story to what we
Yeah.
heard before. That's where a lot of people get stuck, is looking backwards, right? And when really they need to be looking forwards.
Yeah. And so what was her breaking point that made her reach out and get a solution to this problem?
So she actually tried to sort it out herself a few different ways. So through the system and some of the add-ons that they had, and just couldn't quite get there. And she managed to sort of secure some budget to get that through. And it was really as they were growing. Again, very similar sort of situation. You can deal with this up to a point, and then you hit that ceiling where we either need, I think the conversation was posed around, we either need to get someone else in to do this, whose job it will be just to do that, massive overhead, long-term commitment, or we find a better way to handle that systematically and through technology. So,
Very interesting stuff. It sounds
mm,
like you have some pretty interesting work there. I love the idea analyzing text. I do this with my podcasts, and I'm analyzing trends and insights that folks like you have. And there's a lot of things in common. Really, we're talking about operations today. We're talking about operational friction. So when the company grows, operations is probably one of the first places you're going to see telltale signs that you've got
mm,
a process problem, whether it be in service delivery or customer onboarding or billing or invoicing, getting the money, and and then customer service. Those are the operational areas that I think are impacted by growth first. I could be wrong, but it could be in sales also. But
yeah.
oftentimes it's in the leadership. The leadership doesn't always, they want a silver bullet because they're a founder operator and they're busy being the hero, or they want a silver bullet because they just
Mm.
aren't informed. Maybe they're disconnected. Do you find that also? that they might be a little disconnected from what's going on operationally and within their company?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually did an analysis of 2 years worth of Reddit posts for nonprofit professionals. I selfishly, I did it because I wanted to better understand the audience that I was working with. Also, we wanted a really good kind of case study to show how you can use AI to do this qualitative analysis. Reddit, I think it was nearly over 5,700 posts over 2 years. We went into that. My original sort of thinking was, oh, I wonder what, broadly speaking, what do nonprofits talk about when they talk about AI? I thought it'd be quite a busy space for it. We didn't see that at all. What we did see was the things that really stuck out was that there weren't many posts about AI. So we moved on to the next kind of hypothesis. But what really jumped out when we were doing that analysis were lots of questions, lots of posts about how would you handle this? I'm in this situation. I'm trying to solve this problem. Most of the posts weren't about redesigning the work. It wasn't, we've got this situation and we need to rethink how we need to do it. It's
Hmm.
it's more, how can I take on more? How can we just fix this problem? How can I keep services being delivered? Or the folks that were presenting on there, which is, I think, a good window into the nonprofit world, and I see this in businesses as well, is folks were more looking about how they could adapt rather than transform. There was clearly a lot of commitment, clearly a lot of passion, clearly a lot of pride in the work. But that was all, everything was focused on how can I fix this problem? How can I just take more on? How can I absorb this complexity? What can I do? And you can see it in the insights that come through the data, people really normalizing workarounds, finding ways to survive the system and survive the processes rather than looking at how you can redesign it. And I think that's really telling because typically we were looking at inferring the seniority level of the folks that were posting on there. And typically it's not really leaders. It was people more in the doing who are doing that. So I think it's A, telling that they're going to Reddit to ask for that kind of advice and see what they can get. B, very telling that how they're talking about our problems. It's not, I need to rethink how we do something. It's just, I've now been asked to do this. How do I do this? How can I incorporate this? How can I convince someone that rather than how can I convince someone that this isn't a good use of my time? I'm now just being asked to do this. Is there a good platform? Is there a good way that I can incorporate this? So I
Hmm.
think that's really telling to leaders to start thinking about, because that's that constant absorption, people almost acting as almost like human shock absorbers to the work that's being thrown at them.
Wow.
If they're not careful, those people will leave. And it's typically they're going out of their way to post on a forum to ask peers around what they could do to support it. They're probably decent, very hardworking, passionate, smart staff. They're not folks who are the day finishes and I go home and I don't think about it. It was really telling about how that work's approached. And we were able to pull up a stat as well, which really stuck out to me, which was for every 19 times a constraint was mentioned, only one time was it mentioned that it should be challenged. So it's a
Huh.
19-to-1 ratio of folks looking to change the system. And again, this is only a window through Reddit, of course. The reason I think it's extra insightful is people post anonymously. So they're not worried about how they're presenting themselves. They're not worried about the information too much around what they're sharing. So there is a sense of authenticity and a depth of authenticity that comes with that as well. So yeah, it was fascinating that it came from that. So I think it's really important that it highlighted the gap between what leaders see, because when they're looking down, they're seeing the work happening. They're seeing things being met. They're seeing targets being met or maybe a little bit delayed or whatever that looks like. When underneath it's the duck on the water, right? They're busy, they're busy working really
Yeah.
hard, flapping underneath when to make everything look calm on top. And that's not sustainable. So that's the big
Yeah.
risk for leaders, is being disconnected from that. And the
So,
research that we did shows that.
so leaders should be looking for their human shock absorbers who are absorbing the organizational or operational pressure that growth is causing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some pretty straightforward observations that you can do as a leader just to get the conversation going. Ask your folks, where does work feel harder than it should? Have a think about the last time someone went on leave and something didn't happen because they're the only person that knows how that works. Start digging around the spreadsheets that people have and exist because they don't trust or like or use the system. and start looking at things where people are doing things twice, where they're handling the same information more than once. That's a good place to start. And one thing, a really good conversation to have with your staff, if you're a leader, is ask them what they really don't like doing about their job. 98% of the time, it's going to be stuff that's repetitive. There's stuff that doesn't add a lot of, they don't feel is the best use of their time, stuff that they don't feel has a lot of value. They're having to do it, so it's obviously important for whatever reason. Or sometimes in these conversations, people go, just stop doing that. No one reads that report, we don't need it, or whatever. But it's a really good place to start identifying where rethinking about how that process works or those processes work, and maybe introducing technology to automate some of that stuff can really, really have a big impact.
Wow, that's some great advice there. David, it's been wonderful having you on the
Thanks,
show
Paul.
today. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Just look up David Waters on LinkedIn. I think we'll share the profile link as well. Share a couple of times a week information about this sort of stuff, why work feels harder than it should, what organizations can do. Also, feel free to reach out to me directly. Head to our website, simpleandengaging.com. Me or one of the team would be very happy to chat. We geek out about this stuff. As I said about the start, I enjoy these conversations. My accountant dislikes how much time I spend in pre-sales conversations. I think it's really important to understand and make sure that we can actually add value rather than just jump in and say, okay, yeah, sure, let's automate that without really understanding it. It's every organization's unique. Every organization has special ways of working that need to be accounted for. Yeah, we enjoy all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so that's simpleandengaging.com. David Waters with 2 T's. You can check him out and connect with him on LinkedIn. One thing that stood out to me today is in our conversation is organizations don't realize how much hidden friction accumulates as they grow. And the challenge isn't always better tools or technology. Sometimes it's right in front of you. It could be the human shock absorbers that are absorbing the operational friction that's happening. So that's some great insight. I appreciate that coining of that phrase. And yesterday's news. You want to look ahead. You want to look ahead instead of, you need to know what happened, of course, but that helps you plan for the future.
Correct. Especially in the current environment, right? Business isn't getting any easier. Keeping your good folks together, being able to grow sustainably and being able to look forward. That's what every business should be able to do in the year of technology that we have now. So
that's right. So remember, faith and action go hand in hand. So keep the pedal to the metal until next time on the Lead Machine Growth Show. I'm Paul Guyon, and David Waters. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your enthusiasm. It's not just geeky stuff. This is really useful. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Paul. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
You bet.
Thank you for tuning in to the Lead Machine Growth Show with Paul Guyon, where we show you how to tackle your tech, master your message, and design your dream so that you can transform your vision into reality. Remember to visit our website at www.leadmachinegrowthshow.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Lead Machine Growth Show.